everybody. Raul here for Bass Musician Magazine. Today we have the great honor and pleasure of chatting with bassist and educator Sam Bauer.
Hello. How's it going, man?
It's going great, Sam. So as always, starting from the beginning, we like to get to know a little bit about you. How did you get started in music and on bass?
It's a really interesting question. So I grew up in a household of musicians. Both of my parents were music educators here in Maryland, where I live. And I really didn't have a choice when I was growing up. I mean, they wanted me to start young, so I was playing piano since I was a little tiny kid. And as I grew up, went through elementary, middle, high school, I did choir and stuff like that. When I got to middle school, I started doing guitar and bass. It's embarrassing enough, but when I was a little kid, I happened to be amazing at Guitar Hero. I had no life, 6th grade, sat there, no life, no friends, just sat there. My parents were like, hey, you're really good at this. You want to play guitar? And I was like, yeah, let's do it. So then they bought me a guitar, and from there, I just played every day, got through high school, did jazz band, did choir, did all that stuff. And when I graduated, I didn't know what else to do. Didn't have any other career passions. I mean, I was okay at other things, but I figured I would major in music, so I went to majored in music and music education and music composition at Shepherd University here in West Virginia, not super far. Yeah, and ever since then, pretty much been playing nonstop. More of a jack of all trades, but I think bass has been something I've gravitated to my entire life. Because in my first band, I played bass in jazz band, didn't really have a choice. Nobody else wanted to play the bass, but I loved it. And so when it came time to join a touring band, I was like, yep, bass it is. Everyone needs a bass player. Everyone plays guitar, you know?
There you go. Well, and it's a great thing when you're able to have the intrinsic knowledge of the other instruments, especially when you have to interact with them. So you kind of know. The thing that I find difficult is kind of I'll just say compartmentalizing I'm on bass now, especially I know with guitar players, there is, even though you've got the strings under your fingers and it seems like it's in a lot of ways the same, you have to think really differently or else you put way too much out there on bass as compared to what you would want to do with a guitar.
Very much so. Yeah, I call it an instrumental character arc, right? You each have your own role, right? You're not going to be in guitar zone when you're playing your bass. Otherwise, you're going to like Shred Town, USA, which we don't want, right? Same thing with guitar playing as a bassist mentality.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's nice for rhythm guitar and backup stuff, but you're a guitar player. You want to be able to do those things. Yeah. But then piano is a combination between the two. So,
yes.
I believe.
So you got all your training, and band-wise, how did you evolve, that progression? Because, obviously, we'll talk about current bands, but, kind of how was your progression with bands?
It's actually really dramatic story in a way. I had just finished up my 4th year of college, and I was all set up, got all my credits done, knocked out of the way, and I was about to begin my student teaching in Frederick County, Maryland, where I live. And I had got my placement and everything, met my teachers, brought them flowers, and was like, all right, let's do this. And about like a couple weeks beforehand, and if not the entire year leading up to this, I was really thinking to myself, I was like, man, after watching my parents go through 30 years of public education, am I ready to sign myself up for that? Like 30 years is a long time. And I love music, and I love teaching, but not that much, right? I mean, I do, but like 30 years. And so I was thinking to myself, I was going through this existential crisis. I was like, I'm okay. Like, I want to perform, but I know that if I do this teaching now, it's going to be extremely difficult to balance a live performance setting, gigging, joining a touring band, anything in that regard becomes instantaneously difficult when you lock yourself into a position through it. People do it, but so, I was like, I'm going to audition for this band. So I auditioned for a band in the regional area of Baltimore called Silver Tongue, and that was a band that I worked with for about 2 years before I took a step and joined a band on the national level called Shallow Side. Yeah. So that was the step process, was high school, college, love for performing, saw concerts every week of my life growing up, just different performances, loved the idea of it. And I knew I wanted to get involved some manner. So I got my feet wet by auditioning and joining into a regional touring band called Silver Tongue.
Got you. Well, and the kind of music that each band is playing is kind of different. If I'm not mistaken, Silver Tongue was kind of more prog metal kind of stuff. And with Shallow Side, at least some of the things I've heard, you're doing more covers and kind of a different blend. How would you describe what Shallow Side is about?
That's a very good way of pointing it out. Whereas, in comparison to my former band, Shallow Side is much more into the arena rock, almost southern rock, more mainstream type vibe. Just in the songwriting, lyrical content, everything about it. And as you said, the cover aspect brings it more into a forefront of accessibility, which is the easiest way to describe it in my perspective, which I love. I think that's an awesome thing because not to be, weird about it, but like sometimes when I would show my students and my family and my parents and my students my former band, they were like, "Oh, that's pretty heavy." And I was like, yeah, it was not that heavy. So in my former band, it was much more like a Godsmack type vibe, like a Rob Zombie type vibe, where it had essences of metal to it, all delivered. And my former singer, he's an amazing singer. The way he sings is like just super crusty and very badass. It just sounds great. And so it had a very much Godsmacky, Sully type vibe to it. So yeah, just the two. Mostly, I guess people characterize heaviness, not necessarily on song structure or compositional aspects, but more so on the delivery of the phrases, the vocals, the lyrical content. And in that regard, much more dark from the Silver Tongue aspect, more as the much lighter. I would use even the term pop rock in a way for Shallow Side's early material. So yeah, I think the vocals are a big part in that perceived concept of heaviness. You know what I'm saying?
I do. Well, and it's even challenging sometimes to describe a particular genre because there has been so much blending over the years. And I guess if you look historically back and you would look at maybe a band, you could pick and you go like Led Zeppelin, okay, heavy metal, very, very clear. Beatles, maybe more pop rock, not so heavy, and so forth. They kind of had their own lanes, but as they listened to each other, you'd see things getting incorporated from one to the other, and they got kind of blurred. And so even I've heard the term thrown around with prog. If it's progressive, that's a very wide definition as well. So I talk to people that are playing stuff that to me sounds like classic rock. Like Journey, Rush, some of the older acts that were back in the day. But they're like, no, this is progressive now, and I'm like, okay, well, we're all good with that. But
it definitely, I feel, has to be locked into the historical aspect of it all as well, right? Because through each decade, you have exactly as you said, this kind of duality between the term accessibility. I think is the best thing to talk about, and which end of the spectrum you fall on. Are you into the accessible, which we would deem the pop rock, the Beatles, right, versus the Led Zeppelin, which was accessible but in a different route and catered to a different audience, as obviously. And you see that evolution throughout time, throughout the 60s, 70s, and once you got to the 80s, it was the same thing. But right there in the 80s, you kind of had this crossover point where you couldn't really tell the difference between heavy metal and accessible pop music with the, here comes glam metal, pop metal, which is exactly that. You have this crossover.
Yeah.
Then you kind of see it divide again in the 90s, right? Because then you have this grunge movement where things are heavy, but they're not accessible, right? Parents wouldn't listen to Nirvana at the time and be like, oh, it just slaps, right? They would be much more like, let's go put on, some Beatles or Silent.
Yeah.
Parents in the 90s. Yeah, it's just interesting to think. Garth Brooks, I don't know, different things in the realm, right? But then you get to the 2000s, same aspect, right? Your conversation about prog, I agree wholeheartedly. It's such a vague term because you can say prog is bands, Kansas, Rush, which then evolved into Dream Theater and modern Hagen. There's all kinds of heavy modern prog bands, but yeah, it's such a loose term and people toss it around. Yeah, so it's really interesting from a musical perspective as opposed to a fan perspective, because a fan could sit here and tell you all day about how they perceive the two. And that's actually one of my favorite things about teaching and asking people. It's like, what do you think? What do you hear from the outside perspective, right? Because once you're in it, you're like thinking about all the different reasonings, the colors, the tonalities, the time signatures, things that are physical evidence of prog versus perceived concepts from the listener's perspective. Makes sense?
Yeah. Yep. Well, and I'm glad you brought up teaching. Tell us a little bit about because you didn't totally stay away from teaching. Tell us how you are teaching music.
Once again, it's kind of an evolutionary process, and I'm kind of finding my way into. When I was in college, I was like such a loser in college. I mean, like I had a lot of fun and I like partied up, but at the same time, I like to walk this fine line of like, okay, how much fun can you have with not messing up your grades, right? That's all the process. But for me, it wasn't necessarily a challenge because I had been exposed to so much information at a young age through my parents, and I ended up majoring in voice. So I didn't want to spend too much time practicing classical guitar or piano because I knew that would take time. And I was commuting. I had a full-time job, taking like 25 credits. It was ridiculous. So there was no way I could do anything besides voice because I knew I could show up and I could sight sing and I could do an okay job and hold my own. But so as I was doing all that stuff, I decided to start doing private lessons on the side just to make some extra money. So I started doing tutoring through the school at Shepherd, and so I would tutor all my friends in my theory classes. Because me and my theory teacher were like bros. He took me under his wing and like showed me all the secrets of jazz and like tonality and atonality and pantonality, all this stuff. So I felt very educated in the aspect of theory. So I would take my musical friends who necessarily were intimidated by theory, who didn't like it, and I would try to re-explain it in a way that made it much more comfortable and much more digestible than the intimidating way perceived by a lot of students in theory. They just get intimidated by it because it's scary. So in doing that, I developed this love for sharing theory in a fun way. And by the time that I finished graduating college, I had a couple private students online who I would work with, people in my community, people who I had met through shows and through. Once I had joined Silvertongue, I had met a lot of people. And so I started promoting my lessons, and a lot of people from across the country hit me up for private lessons. And ever since then, I've been building like an online private studio. In addition, I got a job right out of college at the Frederick Letherby Rock School. My boss, Scott Marceron, has been involved in the industry for like 30 years. He worked with Roadrunner Records, so he had all this information about the music business. And meanwhile, I was just getting started about, figuring out how it all works. So once again, he let me into his school, let me teach, and I instantly loved it because it was no longer, hey, let's teach someone how to do this difficult theoretical aspect of music. It was much more, hey, you're going to teach a kid how to play Smoke on the Water, which I was like, all right, here we go. This is going to be super, super easy. And so that was the main thing for a very long time. So yeah, that was pretty much my situation once I started at the Frederick Rock School. But in addition to my private lessons.
When you are creating a bass line, so this is good. You're going to pull kind of more of an academic angle than a lot of people might. What is your creative process? How do you make the bass lines for the music that you're playing?
Really solid question, man. Once again, I do believe that it depends on the genre in which you're quote unquote shooting for, or the vibe you're shooting for. This is different in every setting, right? You want to be in a heavy metal setting. If there's a fast, difficult, quick riff, you want to have a unity within the rhythm guitar part. So in that regard, you don't want to have no, steppy. You kind of just want to consolidate and lift that part up as much as you can without being distracting. You really want to lock into that. And you hear that in a lot of modern metal. You hear people use their picks and stuff. Obviously, I normally am a finger picker until it comes to stuff like that. Anything that requires tight precision, locking fast notes, you'll find you're going to want to use a pick for those. But in terms of the compositional aspect, once again, it depends on the genre. If it's something that's grooving and vibing, you're welcome to open up your own space as a bassist, as long as you're not stepping on toes, right? That's the main game plan as a bass player, is that you want to support, lift, and mend based on the beat and the rhythm, as well as the tonality. But you don't want to step on toes, right? So that's the main thing in composing a bass line. Yeah, just you want to find a way that you can support the overall theme being promoted without being super distracted. You will have your moments, right? When there's a big build-up and there's something happening, that's your moment. That's your moment to be like, boom, something cool, right? So that's how I would perceive it, is all completely based on the context of what you were playing stylistically. You don't want to be playing some classical heavy bass riff over top of like a funk jazz vibe, right? It wouldn't make sense.
And even the challenge goes, I'll say, when you're doing original music, that nobody has any idea what there should be there to begin with. I mean, so you have a whole lot more freedom and longitudinal liberties that you can take. But when you're doing covers, and so for example, Separate Ways, a very recognizable, Journey cover, how much effort do you put into staying true to the way everybody heard it, and how much wiggle room do you have to kind of do stuff to make it your own?
That's a really good question, because you're kind of perceiving it two ways. You're perceiving it as how are we as a band going to do this versus how am I individual going to do this, right? Because two different elements, right? So when we got together to record the covers that we did, specifically Separate Ways, we went into it with the mentality of staying true to the song tempo-wise. We wanted the tempo to obviously be there to make it actually work, right? But just due to sheer physicality, it's a high key. It's an E minor. It's high, lots of high notes. Steve Perry's a legend. He sounds great. And our singer, Eric Boatwright, he's just got a naturally richer, warmer, dark timbre that resonates right around the middle register. So not necessarily as high as Steve Perry, but relatively close. He's got the pipes for it if he wanted to. For us, we knew that we also wanted to bring it to a modern edge. So in bringing it to that modern edge, obviously, when you listen to what's banging on Octane right now, so many people are using 7-string guitars. They're using their low Bs, A standard of stuff that you wouldn't necessarily have heard 10, 15 years ago. Everything would be maybe in drop D or drop C, let alone going down to B or A, right? That's Slipknot's job. So when we're living in this world now where these banger metal tunes are coming out in A flat and A and B flat, you're like, okay, all right, that's kind of like the standard now. It's like everyone does this drop tuning aspect. But overall, I think it just gives it a more rich texture than being in standard. It's fine. So we decided to take it from E minor to C minor because we very frequently play in drop C, so it made sense for us as a band. So we transposed from E minor down to C minor, and as a result of that, it brought it to that, like I said, that modern heavy edge. So that was our aspect, was to stay true to the song as much as we could, melodically, vocally, texturally. The harmony is a huge part of that as well. So we wanted to leave all that harmony aspect in there. So we did. But in terms of the changes that were made, some of the leads are a little tiny bit different. They're more shallow sidey, I guess. The keys, like I said, the key is different. The vocals much lower, but still have that energy to them. So that's the band aspect, right? But as a bassist, I wanted to do everything exactly the way it would have been perceived in the initial song, except for maybe potential fills here and there. And one thing that's particularly interesting about what Shallow Side did compared to the original, in the middle section of the song, there's a cool solo. That's like the main solo. And our drummer started doing this really cool thing at the end of each phrase where he would start the double bass, he would do this rhythm that you hear in there. But once I heard his accenting on that specific phrase, I was like, that's the moment. That's, if I'm going to take creative liberty, it's got to be at the thing that he did differently. So why would I not do that? So there's only a couple of moments of creative liberty in which I decided to throw in some extra pitches that you wouldn't hear on the initial record.
Gotcha.
But that's it. It's a tough question to answer. Not gonna lie, man, because you want to stay true, which we wanted to do, but you wanted to make it around in the same way, which I think every good cover does that.
Absolutely. Well, and sometimes it's interesting because there's a lot of groups that are doing covers, and a lot of times you'll actually recognize the cover more than the original, kind of depending on how well they manipulated it or what choices they made. You're kind of going, wow, I really like that version a lot better. And, especially with a whole movement of like a cappella bands doing stuff where you've got, the arrangement has to be different, so it's got its different elements. But moving away from that and how you're getting your particular sound, what gear are you playing on? So
I'm endorsed through PRS right now, which has been the most cool thing I think about the whole band thing. It's like, wow, I can go on PRS's website. There's my name. Oh my god, how cool! So I got initially endorsed through PRS through my former band Silvertongue. Luckily enough, Shallow Side's guitar player Seth Trimble, best pal of mine, is also endorsed through PRS Guitars. So when our transition happened and I went from Silvertongue into Shallow Side about a year and a half ago, I called up my rep and I was like, hey man, so like I'm switching bands and I don't know if like, can I still be endorsed? And he was like, oh yeah, we already got that taken care of, bro. And I was like, how? Wizards? I don't know if it was something that our label did. I mean, our rep follows me on Instagram, so he's been staying in tune with everything. Yeah, PRS has been great, man. Love PRS guitars. It's super, super rich. For everything that I'm doing right now in any project, specifically in shallow side, as I said, a lot of the tuning is low in drop C or D flat or something like that, or B sometimes. So my 5-string works perfectly. And I've just been trying to expand my comfortability with 5-string guitars, 5-string basses rather. And in doing that, you know, you mess with certain things such as your tuning. Do we stay in standard? Do we drop the tuning, right? So ironically, I find most interesting about myself is that I use kind of a weird tuning on my bass guitar. Is I play a 5-string, but my upper 4 strings, which are normally tuned to standard E, A, D, G, has dropped to C, like drop C, regular C. So my top 4 are in drop C, and my low addition, the 5th string, the lowest one, instead of being a low B as normal in standard tuning and bass, it's down to a low G. So the tuning is very, very strange. It's G, C, G, C, F. So I have a lot of parallel shapes that you wouldn't normally see on a standard tune bass or a standard tune guitar. So I'm kind of living in my own world for a little tiny bit. There's probably a lot of people who do this too, but it's been fun to try to navigate that. So I got my PRS 5-string bass. I use typical wireless Line 6 G90 for just the wireless aspect. For plugins, I'm still like diving into how much stuff I want to use for whether if I use digital plugins or if I want to use some pedals. One of my favorites that I've been messing with, I haven't necessarily added it to our live performance, but Dark Glass gear. Dark Glass makes all kinds of incredible bass tone that you can achieve through pedals and through digital stuff. My guitar player uses a Kemper, so I'm so thinking about maybe investing into a Kemper. So it's like there's all these routes that you can do.
Yeah.
And how much bass tone are you really, really looking for in your live performance? I mean, my PRS sounds like fire. Like it's so thick, and like the bass tone, I don't want to mess with it because it's pure. It sounds rockin' vibing. So it's like, how much distortion / compression do I really want to add onto this tone? So right now, everything has been real simple. To keep the equation cordless for me, I have been running direct, literally just direct, and it sounds good. Like it sounds great. I use drop tuning, the DR drop tuning strings, which set it very comfortably in that tuning. Whereas, you know, if you had normal gauge strings and you drop to drop C, you're not going to get anything but flop city. Right? So those drop tuning strings with the PRS actually just sound good right now. And I'm not a tone fiend by any means. I'm too wrapped up in the theory and content stuff to even consider going down that journey of tone discovery, which I will inherently as I continue doing this live performance aspect. But yeah, been running direct so far, messing around with Dark Glass gear and a couple other ones, but nothing in.
Well, and your PRS is one of the Gary Granger models, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, man, super warm. There's so many tone combinations that you can get with it because it has active and passive switches. All you have to do is lift the volume knob and it automatically switches from your active pickups to your passive pickups. Has low, mid, high for each one, so it's got like 5 knobs on it, which is actually pretty cool. But in doing that, like I said, you can achieve so much tonal diversity that it's like, you throw in a pedal, I mean, it's even more. So I'm not knocking people who are like gear fiends who walk on stage with like 6,000 pedals because, hey, props, they probably have gorgeous tone.
Yeah.
But so yeah, I'm kind of going on like a gear journey right now. So in addition to teaching at the Frederick Rock School, I also teach at Music and Arts, which is nice because I can get discounted gear. So I'm like, Dark Glass pedal, $50. Woo!
There you go. Yeah. Well, and also you're kind of venturing a little in the extended range with Ibanez 6-string, if I'm not mistaken, as well.
I don't think that PRS makes a 6-string guitar, and I'm not anywhere near enough ready to be like, I want my custom PRS 6-string. No. And I'm sure that they might somewhere, but you can't, without dropping like thousands of dollars on a PRS guitar that's 6-string. So I've been experimenting with 6-string guitars. My buddy of mine actually let me borrow his, so that's the one that I've been using very frequently on the road. I was like, hey man, can I have your guitar so I don't ruin my PRS on the road? And he's like, yeah, dude, I don't play it. Here you go.
Yeah.
Because I love my PRS, and, you know, the road is the road. There's stuff happens. Things break. Accidents happen, you know. In fact, I was in an accident last March, a really bad car accident, and my PRS case got smashed.
Oh.
And I picked it up, and the guitar was fine. I was like, ah! So, yep, still got the PRS. Been messing around with the 6-string. Yeah, it's been a true tonal adventure. Because as if my weird tuning already wasn't weird enough, I have my low G, which is the 6-string, C, then G, then C, then F, normal drop C. Then I have a high B flat on top, which is just another perfect fourth of what you would expect a standard tune bass to be in, which for me is nothing but just sheer solo madness. Once you get up there and you're doing the fill at the end of the thing, you're riding on that 6 tiny string, you're like,
yeah,
it's fun. Yeah, so just experimentation right now, but until PRS develops a 6-string guitar, I'm going to stick with the 5-string.
Gotcha.
My main thing for recording aspects.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I've always really kind of liked the feel of the Ibanez Sound Gear line, and I think that's what you're playing on. They're just smooth and sexy, I guess, is the way. No sharp angles. They just kind of feel good when you hold them.
Yes. So, in kind of as we were talking about earlier with the genre-based aspect, bro, like that is your go-to. If you're going to do progressive aspect stuff, you're going to want something that's nice and fluid, like a Music Man or Sterling, maybe. Yeah, the model that I'm playing on right now is just so comfortable. It spreads like butter, man. Anywhere you need to do a run from the low E all the way up, you're set, you know. So,
yeah.
But you know, they're both amazing. I get to play 2 great guitars, so I'm like, I can't decide. Like, once PRS gets that 6-string, man, I swear to God, I'm gonna have no life.
Maybe you can suggest they could do a fan fret version of it.
Ooh.
They're...
Yeah, a perfect world. I want to invest into a fan-fretted guitar so badly. In the prog community, it's so ironic that we were talking about prog already, because like all I listen to is prog. Like
yeah.
I'm such, but it doesn't mean that takes away from my appreciation for good songwriting, right? In the prog world and the songwriting world are 2 completely different worlds, right? Because there's the sheer musicianship, virtuosic madness, and then the condensed, formulated, nice, structuralized accessibility aspect that we were talking about. And the instruments, for sure, can equate to both, right? Which one are you going to use for which? And it just so happens that for these guitars, you can swap gears, like just like that. The tone works for both, you know?
Yeah. Very cool. Well, and leaving gear, moving ahead, we're kind of at we're seeing a little bit of the light at the end of the pandemic tunnel, although it's really kind of hard to say what's going to happen because we thought everything was going a little more back to normal. But now it kind of looks like that may not be the case as much as we would like. What are your plans? What is Shallow Side's plans for the future?
So the whole game plan here, and as it was throughout 2020, was to support the 2019 release of Saints and Sinners, which in truth hasn't even gotten a complete full tour due to the amount of closures and everything that happened, because they dropped it summer of 2019. They wanted to give fans maybe a couple months of digestion before they hit the road. So they had this whole 2020 plan tour, and of course that got shot, obviously, with COVID. COVID complications, ironically, also led to me joining the band. So I have to thank and love COVID at the same time.
Yeah.
But obviously no one loves COVID. So the whole game plan here is to tour. We got a lot of songs in the bank that we're working on, shooting for a winter recording sesh, to try to track these new songs with release aims of 2022, spring, summer, fall. But yeah, touring is the game plan. With COVID, nothing is for certain yet.
Mm-hmm.
As the venues start to require vaccination proof as well as negative test results, which, you know, it's a thing. It's like we can't say no because we're not in charge of it, right? So in terms of the touring aspect, all we have to do is not get sick. That's all we have to do. So that's our game plan, is to not get sick. But inevitably, people will get sick, and as a result of that, you see lots of bands that are postponing shows and, rescheduling tours, not necessarily as a result of COVID policies, but more so as an internal issue for bands, this moral standpoint of, hey, let's not go on tour if we're feeling sick, right? So that's the current thing that we're seeing now. So all we have to do is stay healthy and listen to the rules, follow them, and we'll be good, right? That's my perception in terms of the artist. It's totally different for fans, though, right?
Yeah.
Difficult for fans as well. But, yeah, that's the situation.
Got you. And if people want to stay on top of what you guys are up to, where's the best place for them to look?
So everything is shared in terms of our content across the board on social media. Facebook is the central hub. So finding Shallow Side on Facebook will always get you the information that you need. We're trying to bust through the algorithm to expand our reach as far as we can right now with daily posting and stuff like that. But as well as Instagram, Shallow Side on Instagram. You can follow me on Instagram, but more specifically, the whole game plan here is to promote the projection of the band moving forward. So, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, more specifically YouTube as well. You can stream Shallow Side on any streaming platform. Spotify numbers are doing awesome right now. Pandora numbers doing great. Apple Music, Deezer, there's all kinds of them. But yeah.
Very cool. Well, Sam, we appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to chat with us.
No problem, man.
Folks, you've seen him here, Sam Bauer on Bass Musician Magazine.
Thanks so much, man.